Okay, here we are. Good afternoon. My name is Stanley Worthington. I am excited to talk to you all today about my project. And you may notice that I am wearing a shirt which follows in the theme of my research, pumped hydro in Hawaii. So I thought that a Hawaiian shirt would drive the point home. So pumped hydro, I'd like to start with a quick explanation of what we're talking about today. So utilizing energy transfers, the potential energy stored in the water at the upper reservoir, changes into mechanical energy, spins a generator, produces electrical energy. So you might look at that and say, okay, great, yep, it's a huge battery. And that's exactly what it is. And it actually has a surprisingly good efficiency. Most installed pumped hydro throughout the industry is 70 to 80% efficient. But with that in mind, it is a net consumer of electricity. And to give you a little perspective on that pipe that is shown in the diagram going up and down, what that might look like in one example nearby Lehigh at Yards Creek, that's an 18-foot diameter pipe, and it's transferring water at elevation change of about 700 feet. So what you have, the energy you have to work with in the generation in that example is water in an 18-foot pipe that's actually traveling almost 25 miles an hour. It's an exciting amount of energy. So let's take the discussion to Hawaii. The energy situation in Hawaii is very unique because it's an island. And given that it is an island and it has limited resources, self-contained, it has a very aggressive renewable energy goal. They're looking at 100% by 2045. And they are an island. So unlike California or New York, if they get the math wrong, they can't just buy dirty power from Montana or Pennsylvania. They actually have to figure it out. And so let's go to Pearl Harbor. Since I'm a naval officer, my research involves the Department of Defense assets at the famous Pearl Harbor. Hawaii is an island, and it's a tropical island. And so as solar energy became more affordable, the installed solar PV in Hawaii has increased dramatically, and their duck curve is considerable, as you might imagine. And in fact, they have an intermediate goal of getting to 40% renewables by 2030. And as of 2017, they had 913 gigawatts installed. That's 9% of the statewide electricity is coming from solar PV, but only 1% of that is actually grid scale. The rest of it's behind the meter on homes. And so it's really quite a unique situation. Just this past year on Oahu's North Shore, a grid scale project went in at 49 megawatts. And that was a milestone for the island, certainly. However, if you think about the other 91% of the energy in Hawaii, it comes from fossil fuels and coal that are shipped in across the Pacific Ocean. So what that results in is a pretty bleak kilowatt per kilowatt hour price. It's almost 3 times what you would expect to pay in the States. And that is really what makes my project proposing pumped hydro in the state of Hawaii so unique. So what do we really talk? Well, before we get into that, Pearl Harbor's infrastructure that makes the pumped hydro possible. The Navy has a power purchase agreement with the utility at 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So the military pays almost like a continental United States energy rate because they allowed the utility to install this 11 megawatt solar farm right there on Pearl Harbor. So what you're looking at there on the right side of that solar array is Pearl Harbor itself. So what I'm proposing that the Navy does is take the energy from that solar farm and take it a very short distance across Pearl Harbor and put in a pumping station and pump seawater up into these tanks. Now, what are we looking at? These tanks, it's a very unique resource that the military has in Hawaii. It's 20 underground fuel storage tanks buried in a mountain up above Pearl Harbor. Each tank is colossal, 12.5 million gallons. And I have the Statue of Liberty there for size comparison without her base. Without her base, the Statue of Liberty could literally just rattle around inside of one of these tanks. That's how gigantic they are. And even with her base, you could wedge the statue into there. They're that big. And so total, we're looking at 250 million gallons of storage. Now this storage is being actively used. So the Navy indicated that at most they would allow 2 of the tanks to be converted to pumped hydro, and they would give me the space in this tunnel to put 2 32-inch pipes. So that's what we're looking at. And to summarize our question up to this point, can we take solar plus some tanks and a Francis turbine, and is that the same as having diesel and a generator, which is essentially Hawaii's alternative? So let's look at our parameters. One really unfortunate restriction is at the base of each of those tanks, buried in an unnegotiable amount of concrete, is a single 32-inch outlet at the base of each tank. And so that really limits the amount of flow rate you can get out of the tank. And another kind of bleak statistic here, or data here, is that it's a shallow gradient. It's very much not what you would traditionally look for in a pumped hydro scenario. We're looking at a 1% gradient over 2.5 miles. At Yards Creek, they might have it's like a 40 or 35% gradient, and it was like at most 1/8 of a mile away. Very, very different. And in addition, those space considerations that I mentioned. So what you come up with, we'll talk about this with respect to storage capacity in megawatt hours and the power capacity in megawatts. And so your megawatt hours, if you take advantage of both of those tanks, you're getting 37.4 megawatt hours. And really the area under the curve represents the total amount of energy stored. And so your megawatts is kind of the more key aspect here with respect to the military. If you look at that graph, you'll notice that as the free surface of that tank decreases, you lose the energy and you lose the flow rate, and you're not going to be able to spin that turbine as fast. And so what you get is a decrease over your 5 days of capacity from 3 megawatts down to 1 megawatt. So really what you can only count on is that 1 megawatt. And so if you flatline that back, what you're really looking at is the opportunity to do a pump back, a simultaneous pump back to take into account that area between the black dotted line and the blue line. And that has the opportunity to push you out further than 5 days. So the cost to pump seems pretty reasonable. The solar land lease agreement allows you to purchase energy fairly cheap, not great. And you can pump using the existing pump data from the Navy at 28,000 gallons per minute. It'll cost you $2,000 to charge one tank. And then that saves you, the CO2 savings from that is about eight and change tons of CO2. However, looking into that a little bit closer, it's going to cost you $69 million to do this project. So it's not optimistic from a financial perspective. If you were to just buy diesel fuel in a generator with that $69 million, you could have 57 years worth of fuel. So the trade-off for using this tank farm for flattening Hawaii's curve is, as I've determined, not really the most favorable plan. However, all hope is not lost. The DoD actually, as I dug into this a little deeper, is taking an active role in helping Hawaii reach that energy goal with the Kauai Island Solar and Storage Project. And so what this is the Missile Defense Agency, again, with a power purchase agreement, has constructed 19 megawatts of solar PV paired with an on-site 70 megawatt hour Tesla battery. This is really an exciting project, and it's just one island over from Oahu on the island of Kauai, which coincidentally is also the location of Mark Zuckerberg's 700-acre estate, a shining and tragic example of neo-colonialism. If you're bored, look it up. But what this really is it's hope that these projects of solar plus storage, partnerships with the Department of Defense and energy companies in Hawaii actually is a viable solution, albeit perhaps not with the conversion of the Red Hill bulk storage fuel facility. And finally, I'd like to end on a bright note. Arguably, the world's foremost supplier of coal energy pollution, China, is 100% on board the pumped hydro train. So looking at pumped hydro plants at 1,000 megawatts or greater, there's 69 of them in the world right now. China's got twice as many as we do. But the really cool thing is that right now, China burns 5 times more coal than its nearest country on the list. But in the near future, they're going to have 30 pumped hydro plants online, each one greater than 1,000 megawatts. So it's really optimistic for the future. Finally, I'd like to thank my many advisors and mentors from this project and from the Lehigh ESE program. It's been a very rewarding experience for me. And finally, I will open the floor to questions. I do apologize. I was not able to land precisely on the 10-minute mark like my colleague Nick. So I'll go ahead and stop the share so that people can see all of our smiling faces simultaneously. Any questions? And the question that perhaps is on everyone's mind is that, yes, I am the same uniformed military officer that was featured in the photograph. that Rudy showed earlier. It's true.
Questions for, yes, James?
Yes, just one question. As you were going through your presentation, I was wondering about the economics of battery storage versus the pump storage, and in particular also versus the economics of battery storage against the diesel. We just did a project over the last year and a half down in Puerto Rico, and we found that behind the meter battery storage and even utility scale battery storage was a much more attractive option than the diesel generators. I'm wondering if you looked at that, if you did that economic analysis. And I have one other point after that.
I personally did not do an analysis on behind the meter battery storage. However, in Scott Thomas's 402 class, the other class the cohort has this semester, one of the other members of the class did look into that, and he actually found that the utility scale batteries were more financially viable than the behind the meter. So ahead of the meter was more viable. And he presented an interesting case, which you might be aware of from your work in Puerto Rico, a utility scale battery installation down in Australia that purports to be paying itself off at an alarming rate.
And that's a good point. Yeah, and that Australia project is worth looking at. Just the other point, you made a comment, the future is pump storage. That makes me wince a little bit. It made the dog get excited and everything. But when I see, historically, some of the environmental impacts of pump storage, that has to be factored into the equation. And, in many places around the country, pump storage projects have had a really serious environmental impact. So just with that being said, I don't know what the 30 projects under construction in China look like, but I would put a red flag up on that, say let's learn more about those projects.
Thank you. Actually, that is an outstanding point that I hadn't considered. I lived near the Olympic Peninsula for a while the National Park Service was decommissioning a dam out in Olympic National Park. And to see the environmental devastation caused by the Elwha Dam was really tragic. And I think that it would surprise me if the Chinese government did an adequate environmental impact assessment prior to citing those 30 plants. That's an excellent point.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Stanley. Thank you for all the questions asked. So if you can unshare, and we'll get team 4 queued up. As they are queuing up, Stanley is going to Fort Eustis, is that correct? Under a joint integrated command. It's not a coastal area, so it's not Hawaii, it's in Virginia. So
yes,
Stanley.
I'm very excited. I'm going to be in a joint task force working for NORAD. And the signature block of the incumbent in that position says COVID-19 response, JTF Civil Squadron. So I don't know what that means, but I'm really excited to find out.
Okay. Thank you, Stanley. All right, team 4.